Good evening, a greeting extended to those who are present during this time that's quiet. Across the planet's surface, water carries out movement slowly along paths that are natural, creating rivers that carry out travel from ground that's higher toward bodies of water that are larger. This movement doesn't carry out hurrying, and it doesn't carry out pausing. Channels create formation, banks undergo shifting, and sediment carries out travel gradually with the flow. These processes keep going over periods that are long, carrying out shaping of the land in ways that are quiet and consistent. The facts that follow direct their focus on rivers as systems that are natural and steady, receiving description in a flow that's simple and even. Rivers are bodies of water at surface that are natural and flowing, carrying out movement under the force of gravity. Their movement takes place because water at elevations that are higher possesses energy that's gravitational and potential, which gradually carries out conversion into motion as it carries out travel downslope. This movement doesn't have requirement of assistance that's mechanical, as the difference in height between locations provides the force that's driving. The flow may show appearance that's smooth or uneven, depending on the surface of channel and the volume of water that's present. Yet the cause that's underlying stays as the pull that's steady of gravity, carrying out action on water that's liquid. This process carries out operation continuously wherever water at surface is free to carry out movement across land, creating pathways that are visible and that guide water from regions that are upland toward terrain that's lower. The presence of gravity provides assurance that unless receiving obstruction or absorption, water will keep carrying out travel along these routes in a direction that's downslope and predictable. Rivers create formation when water carries out collection and concentration into channels across land. Initially, rainfall or snow that's melting spreads thinly over the ground, but irregularities that are slight in the surface provide encouragement for some of the water to carry out gathering into depressions that are small. As more water follows these pathways that are minor, the flow that's concentrated starts to wear the ground, carrying out deepening and defining of a channel. With events of flow that are repeated, these channels become more distinct and capable of carrying volumes of water that are greater. Over time, a network that's connected undergoes development, with channels that are smaller carrying out joining together and reinforcing the course that's main. This organization that's gradual of water that's flowing into routes that are defined provides representation of the stage that's early of development of river across landscapes. Most rivers have their beginning from rainfall, snowmelt, or groundwater that's emerging at the surface. Rainfall carries out supply of water directly to the land, while snow and ice carry out storage of water that later undergoes melting and makes contribution to flow. In some places, water that has carried out seeping into the ground carries out movement through layers of soil and rock until it makes reappearance at springs, adding a supply that's steady. These sources that are different may carry out operation together, creating a contribution that's combined to the river that's forming. The importance that's relative of each source shows dependence on climate, that's regional, elevation and geology. Yet all provide pathways through which water carries out entering of channels at surface. This mixture of inputs provides help in maintaining flow over periods that are varying, from events that are short-lived after rain, to contributions that are more sustained from snow that's melting or discharge from groundwater. A river's point that's starting receives the name of its source. The source may be a spring that's small, an area that's wet on a hillside, a snowfield that's melting, or an outlet of lake, showing dependence on conditions that are local. At this location, flow at surface becomes organized enough to receive recognition as the beginning of a channel. The source often receives finding in terrain that's elevated, where water carries out gathering before carrying out descent into areas that are lower. Although the point that's precise can sometimes undergo shift slightly, due to changes that are seasonal or supply of water that's varying, the area that's general carries out marking of where flow at surface that's continuous first becomes established. This location provides representation of the stage that's initial of a river's journey across the surface of land. Water in river carries out flow from elevations that are higher toward elevations that are lower. The difference in height between these areas creates a gradient that carries out determination of the direction and speed that's potential of movement. Gradients that are steeper often provide allowance for water to carry out travel more quickly, while slopes that are gentler provide encouragement for flow that's slower. As the river carries out progress, the slope that's overall usually shows decrease, and the character of the flow carries out adjustment accordingly. Despite variations in terrain, the pattern that's consistent stays as that water carries out movement downhill, following the contours of the land. This movement that's downward creates connection of regions that are upland with plains, basins, and eventually bodies of water that are larger, creating a part that's essential of circulation of water at surface. The direction of a river's flow receives control by the slope of the land. The surface of the ground doesn't show level quality, and even differences in height that are gentle carry out guiding of movement of water in a direction that's consistent. Water shows response to these differences by carrying out movement from areas of elevation that's greater to areas of elevation that's lesser, following the gradient that's natural. The steeper the slope, the more influence gravity possesses on the speed of the water that's moving, although shape of channel and roughness of surface also assume a role. Over distances that are long, the slope that's overall may become very gradual, yet even changes in elevation that are small stay sufficient to carry out maintenance of movement that's steady. The arrangement of hills, plains and lowlands therefore carries out determination of the path a river takes across a region. This control by slope of land is a factor that's physical and basic, that carries out application to all systems of river, regardless of their size. Rivers carry out following of paths of resistance that's least across the landscape. As water carries out movement over land, it carries out encounter of materials that show difference in hardness, structure, and stability. Soils that are softer and rocks that are fractured receive wearing away more easily than formations that are solid and resistant, providing allowance for channels to carry out development where removal of material has requirement of less energy. Water, therefore, tends to carry out adjustment of its course toward areas where erosion can take place more readily, gradually carrying out shaping of a route that provides reflection of conditions that are geological and underlying. This adjustment doesn't take place instantly, but carries out development through events of flow that are repeated, each one making contribution of changes that are small to the position of channel. Over time, the river's course becomes aligned with zones that provide allowance for movement, that's continued with resistance that's relatively lower, bringing about a path that provides reflection of both shape at surface and properties at subsurface. Systems of river include a channel that's main and streams that are smaller and that join it. The channel that's main carries out carrying of the flow that's combined from many areas that are contributing, while the streams that are smaller carry out action as feeders that carry out delivery of water and sediment. These channels that are smaller may show variation in size, from rills that are narrow to streams that are substantial, yet they all create connection into the system that's broader. The structure shows resemblance to a pattern that's branching, with pathways that are numerous and smaller, carrying out merging into ones that are fewer and larger downstream. Each connection carries out increase of the volume of water in the channel that's main, having influence on its depth, width, and behavior of flow. This arrangement that's organized provides allowance for water from an area of land that's wide to receive gathering efficiently into a network that's single and connected. Streams that are smaller and that carry out flow into a river that's larger receive the name tributaries. A tributary carries out addition of its water to the channel that's main at a junction that receives the name confluence. At this point of meeting, differences in speed of water, load of sediment, or temperature may exist briefly before the flows carry out mixing. Tributaries can carry out origination from elevations that are different or settings that are geological, bringing materials that are varied into the system that's larger. Their contribution has effect on the discharge of the river that's receiving and can have influence on shape of channel and patterns of transport of sediment. The presence of tributaries provides allowance for a system of river to carry out expansion across a region that's broad, creating link of many pathways of drainage that are local into one flow that's connected. A network of streams and rivers that are connected creates formation of a basin of drainage. This basin includes all the land from which water at surface carries out flow toward the river that's main and same, and its tributaries. Rainfall within this boundary eventually carries out finding of its way into the network of channel that's shared, either by runoff that's direct or through storage that's intermediate in soil and groundwater. The limits of a basin of drainage receive definition by ground that's higher, which carries out separation of it from basins that are neighboring where water carries out flow in directions that are different. Within the basin, movement of water receives organization by the pattern of slopes and channels, creating a system of drainage at surface that's unified. This arrangement provides a framework for carrying out understanding of how water carries out travel from points that are scattered on land into a pathway of river that's common. A basin of drainage is the area of land where water carries out draining into a system of river that's particular. This area receives definition by the topography that's natural, which carries out direction of water at surface toward a network of channels that's shared. Any precipitation that carries out falling within this boundary possesses the potential to make contribution to the river that's same, either by carrying out flow across the surface or by carrying out movement slowly through soil and rock before carrying out entering of a stream. The shape and size of a basin of drainage show dependence on landforms that are regional, including hills, ridges, and valleys that carry out guiding of the direction of runoff. Systems of river that are larger may carry out draining of areas that are vast, while systems that are smaller receive confinement to regions that are more limited. The boundary itself may not always be visible sharply on the ground, yet it provides representation of a separation that's hydrological and clear between systems that are neighboring. All movement of water within this area receives linking by flow that's gravity-driven toward the channel that's main and same. Divides are areas of land that are elevated and that carry out separation of basins of drainage that are neighboring. These features often receive formation by ridges, hills, or ground that's higher and that carry out direction of water to carry out flow in directions that are different on either side. When precipitation carries out falling on one side of a divide, it carries out entering of one system of drainage, while water that's falling on the side that's other carries out flow into one. That's different. Divides can show range from rises that are subtle in terrain that's relatively flat to crests of mountain that are prominent. Their presence carries out determination of the organization that's large scale of water at surface across continents, having influence on which oceans or basins that are inland receive flow of river. Although divides may carry out shift gradually over periods that are long due to erosion or change that's geological at any time. That's given they provide a boundary that's stable for patterns of drainage at surface. Rivers carry out transport of water from continents toward oceans, lakes or basins that are inland. This movement creates connection of regions that are upland, lowlands, and zones that are coastal through a pathway of flow at surface that's continuous. The destination of a river shows dependence on topography that's regional and the presence of basins that are enclosed or coastlines that are open. In many cases, rivers eventually carry out discharge into the sea, where their water that's fresh carries out mixing with water of ocean that's saline. In other settings, water may reach lakes that are large or depressions that are interior with no outlet that's direct to the ocean. Through this transport, rivers assume a role that's central in carrying out movement of water that carried out origination as precipitation back toward bodies of water that are larger, carrying out maintenance of circulation within the system that's hydrological. Some rivers carry out ending in depressions that are inland where water carries out evaporation or carries out seeping underground. In these areas, the landscape creates formation of a basin that's closed and that doesn't create connection to the sea. As water of river carries out accumulation, it may create formation of lakes or wetlands, but without an outlet, the balance of water receives control mainly by evaporation and infiltration into the ground. Over time, minerals that are dissolved and carried by the river can stay behind as water receives loss, having influence on the composition that's chemical of the water that's remaining. These basins that are endorheic take place in settings that are climatic and various, particularly in regions where evaporation shows excess over precipitation. Rivers that carry out termination in such basins still carry out following of the processes that are gravity-driven and same, though their water doesn't reach the ocean. Flow of river shows variation depending on climate, season and conditions that are local. Periods of rainfall that's increased or snowmelt can carry out raising of levels of water and carry out increase of the speed and volume of flow, while intervals that are drier may carry out reduction of discharge. Temperature, cover of vegetation, properties of soil, and contributions from groundwater also have influence on how much water carries out, entering and stays in the channel. In some regions, patterns of flow carry out following of cycles that are seasonal and regular, while in others they carry out response more directly to events of weather that are individual. These variations take place within the framework that's broader of the channel of river, which carries out adjustment over time to carry out accommodation of amounts of water and sediment that are changing. The amount of water that's moving in a river receives the name of its discharge. Discharge receives measurement as the volume of water that's passing a point that's specific in the channel during a period of time that's given. It provides reflection of the contributions that are combined from rainfall that's upstream, snow that's melting, inflow from tributary, and input from groundwater. Discharge can carry out change from hour to hour or across seasons, showing dependence on weather and conditions of catchment. Discharge that's higher generally leads to flow that's deeper and wider within the channel, while discharge that's lower carries out reduction of the area that receives covering by utamto. This measure provides a description that's basic of how much water the river is carrying out, conveying through its course at any moment. Discharge of river receives influence from rainfall, snowmelt, and input from groundwater. Rainfall can bring about increases in flow that are rapid when water carries out running off the surface into channels. Snowmelt may carry out supply of water more gradually, especially in regions with changes in temperature that are seasonal. Groundwater can provide a contribution that's steadier, as water that's stored below the surface carries out movement slowly into the river. The balance among these sources shows variation by location and time of year, bringing about patterns of flow that are different in systems of river that are different. Conditions of soil that are local, cover of vegetation, and slope of land also have effect on how quickly water reaches the channel. Together, these factors carry out determination of the quantity of water that a river carries at times that are different. Channels of river are the paths that are physical through which water carries out flow. A channel consists of a bed which creates formation of the surface that's bottom and banks that carry out definition of its sides. The shape of the channel doesn't show fixation, but carries out evolution in response to movement of water and transport of sediment. Channels may be narrow or wide, shallow or deep, showing dependence on conditions that are local and discharge. The boundaries of the channel carry out guiding of the flow, carrying out concentration of water into a route that's defined rather than providing allowance for it to carry out, spreading evenly across the land. This concentration provides enablement for the river to carry out maintenance of a pathway that's continuous from its source toward its destination. Channels receive shaping by the movement of water and sediment. Water that's flowing carries out exertion of force on the bed and banks, gradually carrying out removal of some material and carrying out deposition of other material in locations that are different. The type and size of sediment, along with the speed of the water, have influence on how the channel carries out adjustment. Over time, these processes can carry out deepening of the channel, carry out widening of it, or carry out alteration of its alignment across the landscape. The form that's resulting provides representation of a balance between the energy of the water that's moving and the resistance of the materials that carry out making up of the boundaries of channel. This balance doesn't show static quality, as changes in discharge or supply of sediment can lead to adjustments that are further. Channels of river can carry out change of position over time. Erosion may carry out removal of material from one bank, while deposition carries out building up of material on another, causing the channel to carry out shift laterally. Movement that's gradual of bends across a floodplain is one example that's common of this process. In some cases, channels may also carry out shift more abruptly if a pathway that's new and lower carries out development during conditions of flow that are high. These changes take place over timescales that are varying, from events that are individual to periods of adjustment that are gradual and long. The position of channels that's shifting makes contribution to the reshaping that's ongoing of the landscape that's surrounding. Water that's flowing carries out exertion of force on the riverbed and banks. As water carries out movement through a channel, its mass and velocity create pressure against the surfaces it carries out contact with. This pressure shows variation across the channel, often being stronger where flow is deeper or faster. The contact that's continuous between water that's moving and boundaries of channel carries out transfer of energy to materials of soil and rock. Over time, this force can carry out loosening of particles, carry out shifting of sediments, and carry out modification of the shape of the channel. Even when the changes don't show visibility immediately, the action of water that's moving and persistent stays as a factor that's important in carrying out shaping of the river's structure that's physical. This force provides allowance for rivers to carry out erosion of soil and rock. When the energy of the water that's moving shows excess over the resistance of the materials in the bed or banks, particles can receive detachment and carry out carrying away. Materials that are softer tend to receive removal more easily, while rock that's harder may have requirement of periods that are longer of exposure or energy of flow that's higher. The process doesn't take place uniformly along the channel, as variations that are local in speed of flow and type of material have influence on where erosion is most active. Through episodes of flow that are repeated, the removal of material that's gradual carries out alteration of the channel's dimensions and makes contribution to change of landscape. Erosion is the process of carrying out wearing away of material from the surface of land. In environments of river, erosion involves the detachment and transport of particles from the bed of channel banks and areas that are surrounding. This process receives driving from the energy of water that's moving, which can carry out overcoming of the forces that carry out holding of soil and rock in place. Erosion carries out work together with transport and deposition, creating formation of part of a cycle of movement of material that's continuous. The rate at which erosion takes place shows dependence on factors such as speed of water, load of sediment, and the properties that are physical of the surface that's receiving action upon. Over periods that are long, erosion makes contribution to the development of valleys and other landforms that receive association with systems of river. Rivers carry out erosion mainly through action that's hydraulic, abrasion and solution. These processes carry out operations simultaneously within many channels, though their importance, that's relative, shows variation by location. Action that's hydraulic involves the force that's direct of water on surfaces, while abrasion shows dependence on particles of sediment carrying out striking and scraping against the bed and banks. Solution takes place when certain minerals carry out dissolving into the water. Together, these mechanisms provide enablement for rivers to carry out removal of both material that's loose and, in some cases, rock that's more solid. The effect that's combined leads to modification that's gradual of the channel and land that's adjacent. Action that's hydraulic takes place when water that's moving carries out dislodging of material. The force of water that's flowing can carry out entering of cracks and spaces that are small within soil or rock, carrying out exertion of pressure that carries out weakening and separation of particles. Changes in speed of water and turbulence can carry out increase of this effect, particularly during conditions of flow that are higher. Once receiving loosening, the material becomes available for transport that's downstream. Action that's hydraulic doesn't have requirement of the presence of tools of sediment, as the water itself provides the force that's necessary. This mechanism carries out operation continuously wherever water carries out flow against boundaries of channel. Abrasion takes place when sediment that receives carrying by water carries out scraping against surfaces. Particles such as sand, gravel and stones that are small carry out movement along the bed and banks, coming into contact with materials of channel. As these particles receive transport, they carry out striking and grinding against the surfaces, gradually carrying out wearing of them down. The effectiveness of abrasion shows dependence on the size and hardness of the sediment, as well as the speed of the flow. Particles that are coarser can bring about changes in surface that are more noticeable, while particles that are finer make contribution to wear that's smoother over time. This process provides assistance in carrying out shaping of the channel by carrying out removal of material from areas that are exposed. Solution involves the dissolution that's chemical of certain rocks. Some minerals can carry out dissolving when they come into contact with water, especially if the water contains gases that are dissolved or acids that are naturally occurring. As water carries out flow through a channel, it can carry out carrying of substances that are dissolved away from surfaces of rock. This process is generally slow, but can be significant in areas with types of rock that are soluble. The material that's dissolved becomes part of the load that's chemical of the river and carries out continuation downstream. Solution, therefore, makes contribution to erosion without the need for scraping or impact that's physical. Material that's eroded becomes sediment within the system of river. Once particles receive detachment from the bed, banks, or land that's surrounding, they carry out entering of the flow and receive carrying by the water that's moving. These particles show variation in size, shape, and composition, showing dependence on their source. Some sediment stays close to the bed, while other particles receive holding within the column of water or receive carrying in form that's dissolved. The presence of sediment has influence on clarity of water, processes of channel, and deposition that's downstream. Sediment is a component that's key of dynamics of river, creating link of erosion in one area to deposition in another. Sediment includes particles such as clay, silt, sand, gravel, and stones. Clay and silt consist of particles that are very fine and that can stay suspended in water for periods that are long. Particles of sand are larger and may carry out movement along the bed or in suspension under conditions of flow that are suitable. Gravel and stones are materials that are coarser and that typically carry out travel along the bottom of channel through rolling or sliding. The mixture of these sizes within a river shows dependence on geology that's local, processes of erosion, and energy of flow. The variety of sizes of sediment has effect on how and where material receives transport and deposition. Rivers carry out transport of sediment downstream. As water carries out movement through the channel, it carries out carrying of sediment away from areas of erosion toward areas where conditions of flow may provide allowance for deposition. The distance a particle carries out travel shows dependence on its size, density, and the speed of the water. Some particles may carry out settlement quickly, while others stay in motion over stretches of the river that are long. This transport that's downstream creates connection of different parts of the system of river, carrying out distribution of material across the landscape. The movement of sediment is an aspect that's continuous of function of river. Sediment can carry out movement by rolling, bouncing, suspension, or load that's dissolved. Particles that are coarser, such as gravel, often carry out travel along the bed, by rolling or sliding when the force of the flow is sufficient to carry out shifting of them. Some particles receive lifting briefly and carry out hopping forward in a series of movements that are short, a process sometimes receiving description as bouncing. Materials that are finer, like silt and clay, may stay suspended within the column of water, receiving carrying along without contact that's constant with the bed. In addition to these particles that are solid, certain minerals carry out travel in form that's dissolved, becoming part of the composition that's chemical of the river. The combination of these methods of transport provides allowance for rivers to carry out movement of material of many sizes under conditions of flow that are varying. The riverbed is the surface that's bottom of a channel of river. It consists of the materials that create formation of the base over which water carries out flow, including rock, gravel, sand, or sediments that are finer. The composition of the bed has influence on how easily material can receive erosion or movement. In some areas, the bed may be bedrock that's exposed, while in others it is made up of deposits that are loose and that carry out shifting more readily. The shape of the riverbed, including its depth and slope, provides help in carrying out determination of patterns of flow and distribution of velocity within the channel. Interaction that's continuous between water that's flowing and materials of bed leads to adjustments that are gradual in form of bed. Banks of river are the sides of a channel of river. They carry out definition of the boundaries that are lateral and that contain flow that's normal within the channel. Banks may consist of soil, sediment, rock, or a combination of materials, and their stability shows variation depending on composition and conditions of moisture. Water that's flowing can carry out erosion of banks, particularly where velocity is higher, while deposition may carry out building of them up in other locations. Vegetation and systems of root can have influence on strength of bank by carrying out binding of particles of soil together. Changes in position of bank make contribution to the adjustment that's overall of the channel over time. The shape of a channel of river shows dependence on speed of flow and load of sediment. Water that's faster moving possesses capacity that's greater to carry out carrying of sediment and can carry out erosion of channels that are deeper or wider when energy is available. Where supply of sediment is high, deposition may carry out alteration of the form of channel by carrying out building of bars or carrying out raising of the bed. The balance between the amount of sediment that's entering the channel and the ability of the flow to carry out transport of it has influence on whether the channel carries out deepening, widening, or becomes more complex in shape. These adjustments take place gradually as the river shows response to changes in volume of water and supply of material. Flow that's faster generally carries out increase of a river's capacity to carry out carrying of sediment. As velocity of water undergoes rise, the force that's carrying out action on particles at the bed and within the flow also shows increase. This provides allowance for particles that are larger or denser to receive lifting or carry out movement along the channel. Capacity that's higher doesn't always mean more sediment shows presence, but it provides indication that the river can carry out transport of a range of sizes of particle that's greater when they are available. When flow carries out slowing, this capacity shows decrease, and some of the material that's transported may carry out settlement. Variations in speed of flow therefore assume a role that's important in carrying out control of movement of sediment within systems of river. When the velocity of moving water begins to drop, sediment finds its way to the riverbed. The force that once held particles suspended in the current weakens as the flow slows down. Dense and larger particles make their descent first, while finer grains follow when conditions become calm enough. Where a river widens, or where the gradient eases, this settling process becomes most visible. Layers of sediment gradually accumulate through repeated cycles of slowing flow. The shape of the channel itself changes over time, and new features begin to take form both within and alongside the waterway. A river that loses its energy begins to release the sediment it carries. This loss of energy happens in several ways: through a gentler slope, through reduced water volume, or through a widening of the channel itself. Once the water can no longer support the weight and size of its load, material starts to collect along the banks and on the bed below. Certain locations become predictable sites for this accumulation, particularly the protected inner curves of bends and the places where rivers meet flatter terrain. Rather than removing material from the system entirely, this process balances the erosion happening upstream by redistributing what has been carried downstream. Along the course of rivers, deposition builds distinctive landforms. Where sediment gathers in particular zones, features like bars, levees, and floodplains emerge from the accumulating material. The patterns of water movement and sediment delivery shape these forms over extended periods. Through repeated episodes of deposition, the channel bed rises in some areas while flat zones beside the river expand outward. The landforms that result are products of the same forces that move and settle sediment, and they continue changing as conditions shift around them. Beside rivers lie broad flat areas known as floodplains, constructed entirely from settled sediment. These zones develop in places where rivers periodically overflow their main channels, leaving behind thin sheets of fine material. Cycle after cycle of this process creates wide, level surfaces that run parallel to the channel. Silts and clays make up much of the floodplain material, having settled from water that moved more slowly across these surfaces. The size of the river, the amount of sediment available, and how often the water spills over all determine how extensive these flat areas become. Within many river systems, floodplains represent a natural and integral component of the landscape. The creation of floodplains depends on flooding that happens again and again, each event bringing more sediment. When flow conditions intensify, water pushes beyond the channel's normal boundaries and spreads across the land nearby. The spreading water loses speed, which allows the sediment it carries to drift down and settle. A thin layer of new material arrives with each flooding event. Across long stretches of time, these layers stack up and create relatively smooth terrain running alongside the river. The ongoing exchange between confined channel flow and widespread overbank deposition keeps the floodplain structure intact. Flooding represents a natural phenomenon in which river water extends beyond the channel banks. This happens when the amount of water flowing through exceeds what the channel can hold. Several factors in the drainage basin can boost discharge levels, including prolonged rainfall, melting snow, or some combination of these inputs. Once the water tops the banks, it spreads onto the low ground adjacent to the channel. How far and how deep this spreading goes depends on the channel's shape, the topography of the floodplain, and the volume of incoming water. When the surplus water eventually drains away or soaks into the ground, the flow settles back into the main channel, and the river resumes its normal course. During flood events, when water moves beyond the channel, fine sediment gets deposited across floodplains. The moment water leaves its confined path, it encounters a wider area and meets resistance from the land surface, both of which slow it down. This drop in velocity gives suspended particles, particularly silts and clays, the chance to fall and settle. Thin but widespread layers of deposited material form in this way, gradually raising the elevation of the floodplain surface. Each repeated event adds to soil development and influences how high the land stands next to the river. Through this process, occasional surges in flow connect directly with long-term transformations in floodplain structure. Along the edges of river channels, deposited material can build up into features called natural levees. The moment floodwater spills from the channel, it rapidly loses energy near the bank margins. Coarser particles still held in suspension may settle quickly near the channel edge, forming low ridges that run parallel to the water's path. Finer particles travel farther before they settle across the broader floodplain. Through time, these accumulated deposits create subtle embankments that shape how later floods spread across the land. Natural levees form part of the typical depositional patterns tied to water that flows beyond the channel. In river channels, curves known as meanders take shape over time. Flowing water interacts with the channel boundaries in ways that encourage curved paths instead of straight ones. Minor irregularities in the channel layout can expand as erosion and deposition work differently around the curve. The curved shape influences water movement, creating variations in both speed and depth from one side of the channel to the other. Rivers that move across gentle slopes and through materials that erode and settle easily tend to develop these meandering patterns. The formation of meanders relies on contrasting processes acting on opposite sides of each bend. Along the outer edge of a curve, water picks up speed, which strengthens its capacity to strip material away from the bank. Along the inner edge, the flow moves more slowly, creating conditions that encourage sediment to settle. This contrast between the two sides makes the bend more pronounced over time. The persistent difference between erosion and deposition drives the development of the channel's winding pattern. Erosion works most actively along the outer edge of a meander. Water traveling around a bend reaches higher speeds along the outside curve, applying greater force to the bank material. This increased force removes soil and sediment, steadily carving into the outer bank. As material continues to be stripped away, this side of the channel grows steeper and the bend shifts outward. Through many flow events, this ongoing process enlarges the meander and causes it to migrate gradually across the floodplain. Along the inner edge of a meander, deposition becomes the dominant process. Flow velocity drops along the inside of the bend, limiting the river's capacity to transport sediment. Particles carried from upstream or eroded from the opposite bank find a place to settle in this quieter zone. The deposits that build up often create gently sloping features that reach from the bank into the channel itself. The sediment that accumulates on the inner side works in tandem with the erosion on the outer side, together maintaining the characteristic curved form of the meander. Across a floodplain, meanders shift their position through time. Erosion persists along the outer banks, while deposition continues building up the inner banks, causing the channel to move sideways, bit by bit. This sideways movement happens slowly, changing the river's path over years or even longer periods. Earlier positions of the channel leave their mark on the floodplain through abandoned features and layers of sediment. In many river systems with gentle gradients, this migration of meanders represents a normal part of how channels adjust. When a meander gets cut off from the main channel, an oxbow lake can come into being. Ongoing erosion at the outer banks of a bend may narrow the strip of land between two adjacent sections of the channel. During periods of high flow, water may find a shorter and straighter route across this narrow neck, leaving the former loop stranded. Sediment then fills in and seals the ends of the abandoned bend, separating it completely from the active channel. What remains is a curved body of water, isolated but still bearing the shape of the river's former path. The gradient of a river typically grows steeper near its source and becomes gentler as it moves downstream. In the upper reaches, rivers cut across terrain with significant elevation changes packed into short distances. These steeper slopes can drive higher flow velocities and increase the potential for erosion. Farther downstream, the land flattens out and the overall gradient decreases. This reduction in slope affects the shape of the channel, the behavior of the flow, and how sediment gets transported as the river approaches its lower sections. Valleys in the upper reaches of rivers tend to be narrower and cut deeper into the landscape. In these zones, steep gradients combined with vigorous downward erosion create channels hemmed in by relatively steep valley walls. The river's energy focuses more on cutting down into the bed rather than expanding the valley sideways. The landscape surrounding these upper sections often displays pronounced vertical relief when compared with areas farther downstream. The form these valleys take reflects the long interaction between flowing water and the resistant materials it encounters. Farther downstream, river valleys become wider and floodplains stretch out more broadly. Gentler gradients and slower flow encourage the channel to shift sideways rather than continue cutting deeply. Erosion along the valley sides and deposition across the floodplain work together to create wider, flatter areas beside the river. Under these conditions, meanders can grow and migrate with greater ease. The overall shape of the valley in these lower sections shows the results of long-term adjustment to reduced slopes and continuous sediment movement. Over the long term, rivers play a major role in reshaping the surface of the earth. Through the combined actions of erosion, transport, and deposition, they modify the topography of vast regions. Material scraped from highland areas gets carried along and eventually redistributed in lowlands or near river mouths. Across extended timescales, this redistribution of sediment drives the development of valleys, plains, and deltas. River processes never stop, constantly linking the movement of surface water with the evolution of the landscape. Through erosion, rivers carve out valleys and gorges across the land. Flow concentrated along channels. Strips material from the surface, gradually deepening and lengthening these depressions. Where layers of resistant rock exist, the river may cut downward to create steep-sided formations. The size and character of the resulting features depend on the local geology and the conditions of flow. These landforms stand as the accumulated result of erosion sustained along river courses over long periods. Material can travel remarkable distances through river systems. Sediment eroded in one section of a drainage basin may journey many kilometers before it finally settles. How far it travels depends on the size of the particles, the conditions of flow, and the characteristics of the channel. Some material moves in stages, with intervals of transport alternating with periods of temporary storage. This capacity to move sediment over distance creates connections between different environments, both within the river system and beyond it. Within the global water cycle, river systems fulfill an important function. Water that enters rivers from precipitation, snowmelt, or groundwater sources continues moving toward larger bodies of water. During this journey, some water evaporates into the air, some infiltrates into the ground, and some gets held temporarily in lakes and wetlands. What remains eventually joins oceanic waters, where evaporation can lift it back into the atmosphere. Rivers thus create a pathway that links water on land with the broader processes of atmospheric and oceanic circulation. The water flowing through rivers ultimately makes its way to oceans or inland water bodies. Downstream movement persists until the channel arrives at a lake, a sea, or a closed basin. At these endpoints, the moving water slows and may spread out, blend with existing water, or gather in place. This transfer marks an important stage in how surface water moves across continents. Where the water finally arrives depends on the topography of the region and the structure of the drainage basin. A portion of river water seeps into the ground, replenishing groundwater reserves. As water travels along the channel, some of it filters through the bed and banks into the soil and rock below. This infiltration adds to the water stored underground in aquifers. The movement between surface water and groundwater can happen in either direction, depending on which has the higher water level. These exchanges create links between the river flow visible at the surface and the hydrological systems hidden beneath. Groundwater can enter river systems through springs. Groundwater moving through layers of permeable rock may reach the surface where geological conditions permit. These points of discharge add water to nearby streams or feed directly into river channels. Input from springs can help keep rivers flowing during times when rainfall is scarce. How much springs contribute depends on the extent and nature of the groundwater system feeding them. The temperature of river water changes with climate and season. Factors like air temperature, solar radiation, and the source of the water all play a role in determining thermal conditions within the river. Shallow stretches may warm or cool faster than deeper sections. As sunlight and atmospheric conditions shift with the seasons, water temperature follows these changes. These temperature variations can influence both physical and chemical processes taking place in the river. In regions where cold prevails, ice can exert significant influence on river flow. When temperatures stay low enough, the surface water freezes and ice cover forms across parts of the channel. The presence of ice narrows the effective width through which water can flow and changes the velocity patterns underneath. Ice may also affect how sediment moves and settles. During warmer periods, thawing ice adds extra water to the flow. Seasonal cycles of freezing and thawing therefore alter the conditions rivers experience in certain climates. River systems in areas with glaciers receive water from glacial melt. As ice melts in response to temperature changes, it releases water that flows into nearby streams and channels. The rate at which melting occurs varies with both temperature and the season. Meltwater typically carries fine sediment created by glacial erosion, which then becomes part of the river's sediment load. This source of water can provide steady input during warmer months. Some rivers maintain flow throughout the entire year and are known as perennial rivers. Steady inputs of water from sources like regular rainfall, snowmelt, or groundwater keep their discharge going. Though the volume of flow may change with the seasons, the channel holds moving water under normal circumstances. These rivers sustain an unbroken surface connection along their entire length. Other rivers flow only during particular seasons and are called intermittent rivers. Water may fill their channels during wetter times of year, but disappear or diminish during drier periods. Flow patterns in these rivers often mirror seasonal cycles of precipitation or snowmelt. Even when surface water vanishes for part of the year, the channel structure itself remains in place. Ephemeral streams carry water only for brief periods following rainfall. These channels respond almost directly to precipitation events, carrying water for short durations before it infiltrates or evaporates away. Though their flow is temporary, ephemeral streams still contribute to drainage and sediment movement across the basin they occupy. Velocity varies considerably across different parts of a river channel. Water near the surface and toward the center typically moves more freely than water touching the bed or banks. Differences in friction and variations in channel shape create speed differences at different points within the same cross-section. These patterns of velocity distribution influence where sediment gets transported and where erosion or deposition is likely to happen. Understanding how velocity is distributed across a channel provides important insight into flow behavior. The fastest flow in a channel usually occurs near the center. Friction from the bed and banks slows the water along the edges and bottom of the channel. Toward the central area, resistance drops and higher velocities develop as a result. This variation in speed affects how well the river can carry sediment from one side to the other. The faster central current can keep particles moving that might otherwise settle near the margins. Friction acts as a brake on water near the bed and banks. When moving water makes contact with channel boundaries, resistance builds and velocity drops. Rough surfaces, vegetation, and irregularities in the bed amplify this slowing effect. The reduction in speed near these contact zones shapes patterns of erosion and deposition. Friction operates in all river channels, constantly influencing how water moves through them. River channels come in different patterns, including straight, meandering, or braided forms. Straight channels follow relatively direct paths, though even they contain minor variations. Meandering channels wind through a series of bends that gradually shift position over time. Braided channels consist of multiple strands of flow that split apart and come back together around sediment deposits. Which pattern develops depends on factors like slope, sediment supply, and flow conditions. In braided channels, multiple streams weave around each other, separated by bars of sediment. These channels often emerge in settings with abundant sediment and discharge that varies considerably. Water splits to flow around deposits and then reunites downstream, creating a network of shifting paths. The positions of individual threads change as sediment gets eroded from some areas and deposited in others. This arrangement reflects continuous adjustment between the flow and the sediment it carries. Within channels, sediment bars take shape where deposition happens. These features emerge when flowing water loses enough energy for the particles it carries to settle on the bed. Deposition may begin near small irregularities, like slight rises in the channel floor or zones where velocity drops due to changes in depth or width. As particles pile up, the growing mound changes the flow pattern, often forcing water to split and move around the obstacle. This division can lower velocity even more along certain edges of the deposit, encouraging further settling. With time, the bar may stabilize, though its precise shape and location can keep adjusting as discharge and sediment supply change. Sediment bars range in size from small, short-lived piles to larger, more enduring features. During low flow, their surfaces become exposed, while rising discharge submerges them again. These deposits within the channel affect local depth, the distribution of velocity, and the routes moving water takes, making them a common presence in river environments where sediment load runs high. Where rivers reach their mouths, sediment accumulates to form deltas. As a river nears a body of standing water like a sea or lake, its velocity typically falls because the slope decreases and the flow spreads outward. This drop in speed reduces the river's ability to carry sediment, causing particles to settle near the mouth. Coarser materials drop out first, while finer sediments drift farther before coming to rest. Through repeated deposition, the land gradually extends outward from the shoreline into the receiving water body. Within the delta, channels may divide into smaller distributaries that spread water and sediment across the expanding surface. The form and structure of any given delta reflect the balance between how much sediment arrives, how much water flows through, and how the receiving water body moves. Deltas mark zones where the active transport typical of rivers gives way to the calmer conditions of standing or slow-moving water, shifting the dominant process from erosion and transport toward accumulation. River mouths serve as the places where rivers meet larger water bodies. At these junctions, the character of flow transforms as the confined channel encounters open water. Velocity usually decreases, and the direction of movement spreads sideways rather than staying concentrated in a narrow path. Sediment transported from upstream often begins settling in this zone because of reduced energy. Depending on local conditions, like the presence of tides, waves, or lake currents, the mouth can take various forms. Some mouths feature distinct channels that extend into the receiving water, while others display broad zones of deposition. This transition area connects the river system with marine or lake environments, linking processes that operate on inland surfaces with those at work in larger basins. Deltas tend to form in areas where wave and tidal energy remain low. When coastal waves or powerful tidal currents are weak, sediment delivered by the river is less likely to get spread quickly along the shoreline. This allows material from the river to pile up near the mouth and extend outward. Where wave or tidal energy is strong, sediment may instead scatter along the coast rather than building a distinct protruding delta. The final shape depends on the balance between sediment arriving from the river and the reworking forces of the receiving water body. In settings with low energy, branching distributary channels and broad surfaces of deposition are more likely to endure. These conditions favor the steady outward growth of the delta through ongoing sediment delivery and settling. Estuaries form in places where river water blends with seawater. In these zones, fresh water flowing from upstream encounters saline water from the sea, creating an area with salinity that varies. Tides, river discharge, and the shape of the channel all influence how this mixing occurs. Water movement in estuaries can be complex, with layers of different density interacting as fresh and salt water combine. Sediment carried by the river may settle as flow slows and shifts direction under the influence of tides. Estuaries represent environments that bridge river and marine systems, where the physical and chemical characteristics of the water reflect inputs from both sources. Before reaching the sea, river water typically remains fresh. Its low concentration of salt reflects the small amounts of dissolved substances picked up through contact with soils, rocks, and groundwater along the flow path. Though minerals do dissolve into the water, their overall proportion stays much lower than what is found in ocean water. The chemical makeup of river water varies based on local geology, climate, and sources of input, yet it generally stays within the range considered fresh water. As the river nears its mouth, mixing with saline water may start in estuarine zones, but the upstream sections retain this comparatively low salinity. The freshwater conditions maintained along most of the channel affect physical properties like density and influence. How water interacts with sediments and channel materials during transport. Among the world's large river systems stands the Amazon River. This system drains a vast area, gathering water from countless tributaries that begin across diverse terrain. The combined discharge from these interconnected channels creates a continuous pathway that transports water and sediment toward the Atlantic Ocean. The basin encompasses a wide range of geological formations, each contributing different types of sediment and dissolved materials to the flow. Seasonal rainfall variations across the basin drive changes in discharge and channel conditions, while the main river serves as the central artery through which collected water moves seaward. The sheer scale of this system demonstrates how a single river network can bring together surface runoff, groundwater input, and tributary contributions from a broad region into one coordinated pattern of flow. Flowing northward toward the Mediterranean Sea is the Nile River. Its direction follows regional topography, with higher ground lying farther south and lower elevations toward the northern coast. Tributaries deliver water from different climatic zones, adding to the overall discharge of the main channel. As the river passes through varied landscapes, it carries sediment derived from upstream sources and deposits portions of this material along its path and near its mouth. The steady northward direction shows that river flow is governed by elevation patterns rather than compass directions. This system offers a clear example of a long river linking inland regions with a coastal receiving basin through gravity-driven movement. A large central basin is drained by the Mississippi River. Many tributaries converge with the main channel, gathering water from extensive areas of the continent's interior. These connected streams bring both water and sediment, which then travel downstream toward the Gulf of Mexico. Variations. In rainfall, snowmelt and regional geology across the basin affect the amount and type of material being transported. The river's channel adjusts along its course to handle these inputs, shaping patterns of erosion and deposition. This drainage structure illustrates how a major river can integrate numerous smaller flow systems into a single downstream pathway. Dissolved minerals from rocks travel along with river water. As water moves over and through geological materials, certain compounds dissolve through chemical processes. These dissolved substances flow with the water and may stay in solution across long distances. The concentration and type of dissolved minerals depend on the rocks present in the drainage basin and how long water remains in contact with those materials. When river water arrives at lakes, seas, or closed basins, these dissolved components may alter the water chemistry of the receiving environment. This transport of dissolved material happens alongside the movement of solid sediment and forms part of the broader redistribution of substances through river systems. Coastal and marine environments feel the influence of river sediments. Material transported by rivers reaches shorelines and offshore areas, becoming part of the deposits on the seabed. The type and quantity of sediment supplied affect local patterns of accumulation and the shape of underwater surfaces. Fine particles may stay suspended longer and travel farther, while coarser grains settle nearer to river mouths. This connection ties inland erosion to changes in how sediment distributes itself across marine environments. To balance flow and sediment load, river channels adjust their shape. When the amount of sediment entering a channel shifts, or when discharge changes, the channel responds through erosion or deposition. Width, depth, and alignment can all change through these adjustments. The process continues until the form of the channel suits the flow and sediment conditions in place. These changes happen gradually as part of how rivers normally behave. Erosion rates along riverbanks can be affected by the presence of vegetation. Stems and leaves from plants can slow the water near the bank surface, reducing the force applied to the soil. This decrease in velocity can limit how many particles get detached during flow events. Vegetation also affects how water moves onto and away from the floodplain. Whether plant cover is present or absent, therefore contributes to differences in how stable the banks remain. Riverbanks gain stability from the roots of plants. Root systems reach down into the soil, binding particles together and increasing resistance to erosion. This reinforcement can make bank material less likely to wash away during periods of higher flow. How strong this effect is depends on the type of plant, the density of roots, and the soil conditions. Banks that have been stabilized by roots may hold their shape longer under similar flow conditions. Through gradual processes, rivers can shift their course. Erosion on one side of the channel and deposition on the other slowly move the path across the landscape. With time, these small changes alter where bends and straight sections lie. The sediments surrounding the river may preserve evidence of previous channel locations. This gradual movement forms a normal part of how river systems develop. A rapid shift in a river's course is called channel avulsion. This happens when water leaves an existing channel and carves a new path across the floodplain. Avulsion may be triggered by sediment piling up, changes in slope, or high flow events that create a shorter route. The new channel can capture most of the flow, leaving the old channel with much less water moving through it. Such shifts represent a more abrupt form of channel change compared with the slow migration seen in meanders. River systems function across timescales ranging from days to thousands of years. Short-term changes include discharge variations following rainfall, while long-term adjustments involve channel position shifts and valley development. Sediment movement and deposition also happen across this entire range of timescales. The mix of immediate responses and gradual trends shapes the changing character of river landscapes. Precipitation patterns drive how water levels in rivers rise and fall. Increased rainfall within the drainage basin can lift water levels as runoff flows into the channel network. When precipitation is scarce, levels may drop. Snow that accumulates and later melts also drives seasonal variations. These changes in water level affect how fast the water flows and influence channel processes. Among the main agents that move surface water across land, rivers hold a central position. They gather water from precipitation and carry it across terrain toward lower elevations. In doing this, they create connections between upland areas and lowlands and coastal zones. Their channels provide organized pathways for this movement. This role positions rivers at the heart of surface hydrological processes. Across landscapes, river processes continuously redistribute both water and sediment. Erosion strips material from certain areas. Transport carries it through channels, and deposition places it in new locations. Water follows these same pathways, moving from land toward larger basins. The combined effect of these actions produces ongoing modification of the Earth's surface through natural flow systems.